let's talk about a kid's song, shall we? First of all, you know, that one, what should we do with the drunken sailor? What should we do with the drunken sailor? Was it put him in the longboat till he's sober, early in the morning, all that stuff. Bar, bar, black sheep. Well, I don't even know the lyrics. How's it go? Bar, bar, bar. Have you any wool, etc., etc. Something about one for the little boy who lives down the lane. That's been changed. Basically, up in Scotland, the Scottish Book Trust, Scotland's national reading charity, has changed the lyrics to remove references to alcohol and violence and to make them more gender neutral. Thus, the little boy who lives down the lane has become the baby who lives down the lane, because babies can be both genders. That's great, isn't it? And instead of a bottle of rum to fill my tum in Drunken Sailor's songs, that's a bottle of milk to fill my tum. That doesn't even rhyme. I mean, you could get someone a little bit more, if you must do this, maybe a little bit more literate, but probably the most hilarious mashing of these old songs is, as I say, what shall we do with the drunken sailor has become what shall we do with the grumpy pirate. Unbelievable. Let's talk to a man who's never drunk, political commentator James Price. Hello, James.
Good evening, sir. Happy Halloween. How are you?
Thank you very much for that. Yes, well, I'm still a bit horrified by yesterday's budget, but let's talk about something far more important, actually more interesting. What do you make of this? I mean, this is the Orwellian language, please, isn't it? Puritanical nonsense, and not very literate, I would suggest. Here's the thing, that we'll get onto the nitty-gritty of this in a second, but what should we do with the drunken sailor? Can't have that, you know, references to alcohol, apparently. They changed it into what should we do with the grumpy pirate? So what intrigues me about this is, what is it they prefer about the word pirate to sailor?
I mean, where to even begin with any of this stuff? I mean, perhaps that if someone is being a pirate, then they're breaking down, I don't know, some kind of patriarchal capitalist structures, and therefore they should be promoted, or some absolute rot like that. I mean, I think the whole thing is so utterly, utterly dispiriting. We live in a world that is getting more dangerous. In a kind of geopolitical sense, we in Europe have not had a growing economy in any meaningful sense in the United Kingdom or anywhere else in Europe for far too long. Just before the financial crash, we were perhaps in Britain a shade better off than our American cousins were by some metrics. They're now well over twice as rich as we are. We've got the threat of China. We've got all these problems that you hear about day in, day out. And this is what some taxpayers' money is going on. Even if it were a good idea, what a terrible priority. And it's not a good idea. Now, Scotland has gone in a different direction when it comes to teaching young people how to learn to read than England did. And the reason it went in a different direction is because England went one way, and so the SNP said, well, we're going to go in another way. What's happened? Well, England and Northern Ireland copied. They used something, it's a bit technical, called phonics. So you learn first sounds and then how you build words. Yeah. And as a result of that, school children in England and in Northern Ireland are the best at reading they've ever been. They are almost at the very top of all the international reading tables. Scotland, by deliberately not doing this as an SNP way of sticking up two fingers at the English, are doing worse and worse and worse every year. Ugh. So instead of trying to arrest that slide, that heartbreaking fact that if you were born just across the border into Scotland than if you were in England, your child will not be able to read nearly as well because of the political decisions of disgusting people like Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. And instead of trying to fix that, instead of trying to remedy that, they're doubling down with this kind of absolute nonsense. And that is, I think, frankly, unforgivable.
The one thing I would say about Alex Salmond, he had no truck with this, God rest his soul, I liked him a lot, but he had no truck with this woke nonsense and was horrified by his former friend Nicola Sturgeon disappearing down the extreme woke rabbit hole. But this is what sort of shocks me about this. It's that grown, sentient adults sit around coming up with this nonsense and then changing the lyrics. Well, if you must do it, and by the way, please don't, but if you must, can we get someone a little bit more literate to do it? As I said, a bottle of rum to fill my tum becomes a bottle of milk to fill my tongue. That doesn't rhyme. Do you remember the line in Drunken Sailor? Shave his belly with a rusty razor. That's changed to do a little jig and make him smile. I mean, that doesn't rhyme. What's that about?
It's absolutely ghastly, isn't it? And look, the other serious point to some of this stuff is, why do we have nursery rhymes like this, right? It's not just a kind of way of distracting young children. It's a way of imparting important, useful knowledge about things. There's a lot of useful information in these stories, whether it's, today being Halloween, whether it's the Grimm's fairy tales that warn you about stuff, whether it's any of these things. That line in particular, about shaving someone with a rusty blade or whatever.
Rusty razor, actually, yeah.
A rusty razor. Well, that actually used to be a very dangerous thing to do. It's why that the barbers and surgeons kind of come from the same kind of route, because if you got nicked when you were shaving, that could get infected, and without proper antibiotics for a long time, that would be very dangerous for you. There's a whole useful thing there. When a child stops and asks about the rusty razor, you explain, because if you get tetanus or something a long time ago, it could be fatal. There's all kinds of useful stuff in these that you get rid of in this absolute nonsense. And the other really worrying thing is that not only is that kind of horrible mindset of the sort of the HR personnel just an evil smile as they destroy all of this stuff, you're going to get to a point where if this stuff really sticks, we're going to lose even the old history of these things. You get reprints of new books, whether it's Enid Blyton and the Famous Five, and these things get replaced when the stories and the words don't match the times anymore. When even university students reading English literature at top universities, so I don't want to read this stuff, I can't engage with it. And when there are troubling words in novels, you read somebody like Mark Twain, you read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer, and it has words that we would call today very problematic, because Mark Twain was talking about the racial inequalities inside the United States. So the N-word would have been used in those sorts of stories. It's a useful thing to be able to understand that, so we know where we're coming from. And if you erase all of this stuff and you go to this kind of year zero, you don't get to bring all of that knowledge with you. And as we've seen from the budget yesterday, or frankly anything any left-wing politician ever does, their lack of history and understanding the mistakes of left-wingers of the past are what bring us to this point. Because as Friedrich Hayek said, if socialists understood economics, they wouldn't be socialists.
Yeah, I was saying that to Isabel Oakeshott earlier. The thing about socialists, and we've got some extreme socialists mismanaging the country right now, is they can look back on history. The facts of history reveal that socialism has never, ever worked anywhere. It always ends in tears. It destroys countries. It leaves people poor. When they had socialism, recent extreme socialism in Venezuela, everybody lost about 2 stone in weight because they were literally starving. And yet, we still get a bunch of idiots like Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper go, yeah, it's always been wrong. This time we'll get it right. No, you won't. You won't. I want to ask you a question about Starmer and his acolytes in just a second, but I've just got to reference one more of these awful replacement rhymes. Again, it's Drunken Sailor. You know the line, put him in a longboat till he's sober. This has now become tickle him until he starts to giggle. Put him in the longboat till he's sober. Tickle him till he starts to... I mean, tickle him till he starts to giggle.
Presumably, they have to fill out some compliance forms and do a few risk assessments before the tickling is allowed to begin, right? Again, this is the nonsense of all this stuff leads to.
You're so right. You're so right. Absolute madness. Absolute madness. God spare us this insanity. But it's also quite sinister as well. Listen, before you go, James, I wanted to get your take on this. Labour have appointed a new value for money czar. I don't know what the hell that means he's going to be doing, but it was announced in the budget that David Goldstone, some kind of big noise in the city, will become chairman of the Office for Value for Money. And he's going to be paid £950 a day. I think he's going to commit to 1 day a week, but that is the equivalent of a salary of £247,000 a year. A budget that's going to make us all much, much poorer, that includes the appointment of a guy who's going to earn the best part of £250,000 a year, £250,000 a year, doing some kind of job that I can't even work out what it means. That's almost grotesque, isn't it?
Well, I mean, let's give the guy the benefit of the doubt, and perhaps he can make some savings, because it would be so easy to do a job that would make lots of savings inside government. You know, there hasn't actually been any productivity increase across the whole public sector in something like 20 years. It's almost 30 years almost. It's impossible to imagine that. You think when, you know, all the people at home watching this who've just come back from work, think about all the different ways in which you have improved and how efficiently you work, whether it's new technology or new practices or gaining new skills, all these kinds of things that are absolutely essential when you work in a profit-making business, because if you don't do that, your competitors will do it and you die. That hasn't happened at all across the whole public sector. So there is so much fat to trim. And by the way, it's not just, you know, the nonsense diversity czars and all that kind of stuff, because that can all go and that should all be going immediately. But there's so much more in there as well. And the fact that fax machines and pages in the NHS are still used. The NHS is the #1 user of those sorts of things.
Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff is bound up in trades unions not allowing any kind of reforms. It happens in America as well. When the dock workers in America went on strike, even though there are 25,000 dock workers, 50,000 people went on strike because there are 25,000 other people who were just paid to stay at home as to be paid for reforms. All this stuff is crazy.
It's good to know there is insanity in other countries as well. Mr. Goldston previously oversaw delivery of the London Olympics, where costs spiralled to £9.35 billion. And his job will be to advise on, and I quote, how to root out waste and inefficiency, and on scrutinising investment proposals to ensure they offer value for money. Well, one way of saving some money might be not to pay him £250,000 a year.
Well, look, again, I will give this guy the benefit. If he's got a career in the city and he's used to making money, then, you know. But with the track record that Labour have had so far, I don't hold out much hope, because this guy sounds like he's got decades more business experience than the rest of the entire Labour Party put together. And this is why this budget is having such a negative reaction amongst ordinary people as well as the financial markets, because it doesn't bear any rating on reality, right? This is the fundamental misunderstanding that socialists have about the world. Capitalism is not some evil, nasty, greedy thing. It's not some big fat cat taking money off poor people. Capitalism is human, it's creative, it's moral, it's providing a good or a service that your fellow man needs or wants, and you getting rewarded for it. That is the only way we've managed to make the downsides of human nature into a positive. In all of human history, we are more equal than we were before capitalism became a proper thing, before Adam Smith explained to us how these things worked. It used to just be the king was up here, a couple of dukes below him, and everybody else was a serf. Now you've got lots of rich people. Most of the Sunday Times rich list are self-made people. Mm-hmm. And if we created an environment where people were able to keep more of what they earn and build things, then we might feel again a bit more like Americans, who tend to feel that they are temporarily disenfranchised millionaires. And if we could have more people doing that and saying, you built something, that's amazing, I'm going to come and join you, we're going to make this country great again, there's a phrase in there for you, then we have a country that was richer and was happier and more prosperous and more at ease with itself. But I'm afraid that this budget from the Labour Party is going to pit us all against each other. It's going to make us poorer, weaker and meaner, and that's why it's going to fail. It's appalling. Those are very wise words, James. It's good to talk to you again, but I'm going to give you a word of warning. Don't say them in front of Keir Starmer, otherwise he'll put you in prison.